Hey guys and girls, we are jumping on live today with Austin Barbell, and we're going to be talking about preparation for competition. And there he is. Let's go ahead and get him on here. Next.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, good. Thanks for having
Good,
me.
good. Yeah, definitely. Thanks for jumping on today, man. Really appreciate it. How's the preparation for reopenings going?
It's underway. We're
Yeah,
hoping June 1st we can start
yeah,
having club training again.
that's good. Yeah,
But
cool,
but
man.
I would imagine just like most clubs are trying to figure out the best and the safest way to do it. So we're probably going to do reduced head count, which is obviously
Hmm.
mandated, and then just run more sessions throughout the day. And then
Yeah.
we'll also require our athletes to sort of like pre-register or give us a heads up to make sure they're going to come, and we're going to hold them to it.
Yeah, do y'all usually do like specific time frames or anything like that? Or is it more of like an open gym forum and y'all are there kind of coaching the whole time? Or
Uh,
what?
Yeah, so we run team training 4 days a week, and those are during a set time. So the majority of the athletes will train during, in those evenings on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday. And then we've got a small population of athletes that sort of do remote training or semi-remote. They only come in once a week and they do the rest of the training, on their own.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, yeah. Cool, man. Well, so we kind of had a topic that we wanted to hit that I think would be great. I get questions about this on a pretty regular basis, and um, you know, it's it's one that some people have very little knowledge of. Some people haven't really dialed in, and I wanted to kind of talk to you about your approach and maybe some of your athletes' approaches to getting prepared for
Mm.
competition. I kind of have a loose format of what we can go over, but obviously we can just kind of let the conversation go wherever it goes.
Yeah, for sure. So I'd say like the vast majority of athletes that are coming into Austin Barbell that are competing, they're probably within their first year to 2 years of
Hmm.
being in the sport. So in terms of, what they've done prior to get ready for competition, if it was independent or with another club, it's probably different than how we handle it.
Yeah,
So, training is one thing, and training is, it is a lot of fun. And that's 99% of what we do is train, right?
yeah,
It's at 1% that we really need to prepare for. And, I sort of have it broken down into like three different categories. You got the physical aspect, which is your programming, and,
hmm,
you can do that in advance or you can do it on a week by week, and it varies coach to coach. And then you got the mental aspect of it. The mental aspect, I believe, is probably, just as critical as being physically prepared. I mean, how
yeah,
many times have we seen an athlete, even at a world level, like just bomb out or not do well? And that's usually
yeah,
due to like lack of mental preparation or who knows.
yeah. That's usually the big difference between like being able to lift in your own gym and hit heavy singles and go to a competition platform and hit heavy singles. That's really the biggest difference there is usually going to be that mental side of it.
In most cases, logistically speaking, there's also like, there's a kind of a manager aspect to it.
Hmm.
I defer to myself and, my coaches to sort of like handle that on the behalf of the athletes. So, they don't really have to think as much. And we try to like
Yeah,
remove all that, from their routine. We just tell them where to be and what they're going to lift, and they're done.
yeah,
If they're there trying to figure out, what time they should get there for weigh-in, and like, too soon, too early, we monitor their weight for them. It's the most important thing is remove stress,
yeah,
and that
yeah,
sort of
yeah.
goes into the mental aspect of it.
Definitely, definitely. The less worried they are, it's making sure that, they know where to be, when to be there, when to take a lift, when they're not having to concern themselves about that and they're just told, all right, it's time for you to take 60 kilos. Okay, it's time for you to take 70 kilos. They can really just focus on them and the barbell, which is the main goal of us coaches, is to try to alleviate as much as that and control as much of that as we can so that way they can just focus on their lifts as best they can.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of like that, when you start coaching, the one thing you don't really think about is, how you're going to manage that athlete's,
Hmm.
interaction at a competition. For some of my athletes, they might visit the bathroom frequently during training, and those are little, cues I pick up when they're in training, so that I have to remind them, let's hit the head before
Yeah.
we actually, get out to the competition platform.
Yeah, yeah, that's actually a big one. There's some people that I've had to learn that with, in warm-ups and competition, and now I know which athletes. I'm like, all right, every like 3 lifts, we're gonna then a little extra time in between so you can run to the bathroom if you need to. So we start working that stuff in there.
So when we actually when we do our warm up plans, which is part of the logistical aspect of this, we actually write those in there. Okay, this is an ideal time to hit the bathroom because
Yeah,
you're 15 lifts out or whatever.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. That's good. So that was gonna be my next question. So what we do is usually it's about a week out, a week and a half out, is we start handing out basically competition plans.
mhm.
And then they fill it out, and then we go over it together, and then we tweak it together. And those competition plans obviously have like their warm up attempts, which is usually the big one, just to make sure that they're counting. But we have a bunch of other questions in there that we ask leading into competition. What are some of the other things that you guys cover or try to make sure that y'all cover before going into competition, in addition to just having the warm up lifts and maybe openers and stuff like that?
Yeah, so I'll just go back to how we approached state this year because that was the last
Hmm.
big comp that we did as a team. Myself and my other coaches got together to discuss, sort of the empirical data that we're gathering from the athletes throughout their training cycle. Other things that we're looking for are, we want to see a diary or a log from the athletes. Not every athlete is good about, keeping track of how their training's gone, and that's vastly important.
Yeah.
To understand not only, what their mental state is before, after, especially on a heavy-ish day, 90% or more is key.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah, because when they say they're going to open up at this weight, and then you go back and look at their log, and they've been nowhere near that, or they've hit it once, but they've missed it like 7 times, like maybe that's not where we're going to open.
there's a lot of athletes out there. Most of them are relatively new to the sport, and they feel as soon as they get onto the platform, the competition platform for the first time, they're going to rise to the occasion and hit
Yeah,
some astronomical
yeah,
opener.
yeah.
It's my job to dial that back. I'm fairly conservative as a coach, and I think the other folks
Hmm.
that we've gone to competition with have probably seen me in the back room. I every lift my athletes have taken in competition, generally speaking, they've done it in training.
Yeah,
I try not to overshoot too much unless things are really sort of, moving, in the right direction, or if it's a win or lose situation between, medaling silver or gold or whatever, then
yeah,
we
yeah.
may take that gamble.
If it's a 1, 2 kilo PR for the to be on the podium, then
Right.
probably going to put it on there. But I totally agree. I look at I think this is where some coaches vary. Is I look at competitions as time to perform what we've been practicing primarily. You know, and I find that they're more mentally prepared if they also know that they've touched this weight before,
Hmm.
especially when it comes to like the first 2 lifts. That last one, that's where we might be pushing that 100 to 102%.
Right.
But, when they've taken, if we've had a couple heavy single sessions and they know that they've hit that lift or at least within like a kilo of that lift,
Hmm.
they're usually feeling pretty good. But if that very first lift is like the very, and then they miss that and they miss that, or I've got some athletes that have the mindset that they need to open really heavy. That way they have 3 attempts at that weight.
Yeah, that's yeah, I've seen that approach as well, and that
Yeah,
generally doesn't work too well.
agreed.
If at best you go 2 for 2 or 1 for 1.
Yeah.
So like other things that we do, with ongoing logging is we want to know the athlete's weight. We find
Hmm.
that a lot of athletes, male or female, obviously, women hold weight differently than men, won't be tracking where they should be throughout their, training cycle. And then when it gets close to competition, they're like, oh, I'm going to lose, 4 kilos or 5 kilos, as a 67, and I'm just going to be the strongest one there because that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Not at all. So we try to keep all of our athletes within a certain amount of variance over where their competition weight is, and we track that
Hmm.
throughout. And if there's some athletes, the younger ones, they're growing, and we're cognizant of the fact that they might move from a 67 to a 73,
Yeah.
and that's just one of those things we have to deal with as young men and young women get older.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
Other things that we're looking for as well
Well,
is.
quick question on that. Do y'all have specific numbers, or do you make it individualized? So at, volume phase or whatever, we're trying to be within 5%, and then strength phase, maybe we're at 3%. Do y'all do something along those lines, or is it pretty individualized based off of, okay, we know that we can do a pretty, moderate water cut and
Mhm.
lose 2 kilos, so we're going to kind of base it off of that and then backtrack from there.
Every athlete's different.
Yeah.
I try not to have the younger athletes, the kids, the juniors, really cut it all.
Yeah,
Unless
exactly.
unless we're a kilo or just a small variance above, then it's worth, okay, let's just skip a meal and go to weigh-in.
Hmm.
The women tend to be slightly different, and things that I mean, this may be TMI, but we also track menstrual cycles for females
Yeah.
because that's important to understand. You know, from a strength perspective, most women are stronger right before menstruation, and then right after they're losing weight. So
Yeah.
we try to understand. Are they? Is the competition going to be ideal? Can we push? Is the weight gain
Hmm.
superfluous, or is it? Do we have to worry about it?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and then that's a big one for holding water weight too. I've seen some pretty, people that some of our females, especially early on, we aren't really factoring that in, and then all of a sudden realize that she can't drop that extra kilo. We're like,
Right.
okay, we actually really need to start paying attention to this.
So,
Yeah.
so for the most majority, for the vast majority of my athletes, the way we're cutting is we're only staying a kilo or two over. Generally, you can
Yeah.
lose about 600 grams of water the day
Hmm.
of. Obviously it differs based on the size of the athlete, but just, if you skip a meal and don't drink any water, you should be able to drop 600 grams.
Yeah.
Um, I've only had to put an athlete into a sauna like day of, hour before, only once.
Yeah.
And I sort of, after that, I've learned my lesson. I'm like, listen, I can't trust all my athletes. I need to follow up and be the manager.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it does come to like cutting the last kilo and a half, if the leading into it, do y'all typically try to do sauna based? Do y'all try to do a water load? What's y'all's approach to that? Or is it again? I mean, I'm assuming it's the same answer because it is for me that some people do better using a
Mhm.
sauna, others do better water loading, others do
Uh,
better making sure that we're underweight before we even get into the last week of training.
yeah. So I mean, if my athletes are a day out and they're 2% or 3% over, we may visit a sauna.
Yeah.
There was at state this year, I had one masters athlete who generally stays in, pretty good shape, with regards to maintaining his weight. He did all the appropriate steps, cut some carbs out, stopped drinking and enjoying the beers after training and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But, he still came in 2 kilos over and he was just ready to throw the towel in. Unfortunately, we didn't have a lot of options. We were at a hotel, there's
Yeah.
no saunas nearby. So, we put him in, basically, a jogging suit and threw him on a bike for, 20 minutes, which isn't ideal. Um, but at the same time, right after that, once he started to build up a sweat, we put him into, a hot, steamy shower, made him sit in there for, about 30, 40 minutes. And then he made weight, no problem, like
Yeah.
dead on.
Yeah. 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 I find that some people handle that heat really well, and it typically tends to be the people who regularly practice sauna. But then I
Mhm.
have other athletes that we've been that close, we put them in a sauna and it just saps them of their energy,
Right. Yeah.
And so again, figuring that out, we're like, okay, we need to make sure that we're never having to go to that approach again.
Mhm.
And then usually the water load is probably what's a good amount of our athletes do. Um, And once that kind of gets cut that night before, we see that last kilo to 2 kilos, depending on the size of the athlete, kind
Right.
of save off and typically not affect them too bad as far as performance goes. But yeah, if it's always that last minute scraping, I mean, it's so hard to get the energy back.
It's true.
Um,
It's true.
do y'all do any form of water cutting as well?
A couple of my athletes will do it. It's not something that, I'm pushing. Like I said,
Yeah,
a lot of my athletes, they just have like some athletes just lose weight better than others.
yeah,
If you're a masters athlete that's 55 years old, chances are you're not going to be able to drop, 5% body fat
yeah,
in the next, 4 or 5 days.
yeah.
So,
All right, so we were also kind of just discussing things that y'all are looking at leading into a competition. So you're monitoring their program, kind of seeing what weights they're hitting on a regular basis,
mhm.
and then monitoring their weight. When you say you're monitoring their weight, are you monitoring it through the whole cycle, or how do y'all go
So
about
I get more aggressive. I get more aggressive about checking their weight prior to competition, maybe a week and a half to 2 weeks out. However, we ask our athletes to weigh themselves in weekly. So we have a
that?
scale. It's a calibrated scale in the gym, and we use that as a way to make sure everybody is sort of sticking where they should be.
Yeah,
I have some athletes that sort of stay dead on, and there's never reason to cut, and I keep asking them to gain weight, and they never will. And then I have some athletes that are just notoriously underweight. We're actually asking them to eat just so they
yeah,
can fill out the
yeah,
weight class.
yeah, yeah. I've had a few of those too. They're some athletes too, and I find it to be some usually flipped for guys and girls. I find girls want really getting very set or married to a weight class and then making sure that
Hmm.
they stay back in that weight class as long as they can.
Right.
But then usually guys, I have the flipped where they're like, I need to go up to get as strong as possible. I'm like, wait, 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 wait. You might not want to do that either. Um, do you find that um, when do y'all approach maybe an athlete needing to move up or down in a class?
It's going to be based on performance and whatever that competitive landscape is. So, when you get into, meets such as state, and state's great because, it's fairly localized. It's in a
Hmm.
region, and we know who all the athletes are to some extent, and we know where we want our athletes to
Yeah,
place. When you're looking at the American Open or something a little bit larger, it's difficult to understand, the complete competitive landscape. So you don't know. You might have an idea where your athlete's going to be, but there's always that guy that just shows up that never, hit a national meet before.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, it's for state, we're evaluating, where our athletes could potentially place. Will they podium? And then, we make that decision like, okay, they either need to move up or down. And we look at, okay, well, this athlete's a 73, moving them to a 67 is probably going to have a significant impact on their overall total. Is it really worth
yeah,
it? So it's always a risk versus reward.
yeah, yeah. Definitely for us, it definitely comes down to the meet. If this is an important meet, do we need to cut for a specific reason? Does it
Hmm.
mean we're going to podium? Does it mean we're going to qualify for something? And even then, a lot of times I'll only have, I might have you know, a male that or a female that'll only cut down to that weight class 2 times a year just for
Hmm.
that, and then the rest of the time they're competing in a class above them, just to try to minimize that, the effect it might have on their body. That being said, I also don't have anybody even try cutting or worrying about weight classes in their first year of getting into the sport anyways.
Yeah.
I'm like, whatever you weigh in it, we're not looking at podiums, we're not looking at medals, we're not looking at qualification stuff right now. You just need to train, not worry about the stress of cutting weight or making a weight class. We'll put you in whatever your weight class you're sitting at right now. And then once it kind of we start looking at numbers and seeing that competitiveness come up, that's when I'll later add in that element of the sport or element of of the stress of
Right.
that too. But I try to minimize that as much as possible for first time athletes. But they're around their team, and their other teammates are talking about, oh, I'm still sitting over, I got to cut. And then they
Yeah.
start worrying about, hey, I think I need to cut down and all this. I'm like, you don't have to do that yet. So that's a big one too, is those beginner athletes trying to hold them back a little bit.
I mean, so when I look at my team and when new athletes come in, there's one thing I do evaluate is like, where on that team they're going to fit in. So, if I'm looking for a female that's a 49 kilo, class competitor, obviously I'm going to be like, all right, she could be perfect. Let's get her into training,
Yeah.
based on her size and, everything else.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. There's definitely always when you get somebody in as a coach, the first thing you're thinking is, yeah, what class are they going to probably be best at? What
Hmm.
class is going to really, be best for our team? So that's always in the back of the mind. But then figuring out when to deliver that information to them is like the next trick,
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like, okay, we're gonna focus on, getting your technique and your strength up right now. Or in the back of your mind, you're thinking, okay, in about, 18 months, I want her to probably be starting to cut down a little bit, or we really need to start trying to put some size on her now. So then you
Hmm.
start trying to encourage, all right, let's start upping the calories a little bit, and you start sneaking that in there before getting to the point where you're like, okay, listen, you're going to be my 71, you know?
Right. I mean, these decisions to move up or down in a weight class should never be done, within weeks of a competition.
Yeah,
Moving a full weight class, especially the way the classes are split today, it's vastly difficult. It's almost impossible. I mean,
yeah,
I mean, gaining weight, definitely not going to happen.
yeah.
Losing weight, it's possible, but you're going to probably be a wreck once you get out there.
Yeah, yeah, you can definitely do, and we've seen the effects of that on anywhere, especially some of these international athletes. You see them when they do these harsh cuts and they
Hmm.
really come down, and you start seeing that struggle. And then you also start seeing that struggle when they do it from meet to meet. They do this big cut, maybe they have a really good meet, and you're like, oh, this person's going to be the next 49. And then
Yeah.
they show up in the next meet and they're back at that 49 class. You see a little less performance.
Right.
Performance is dropping and dropping and dropping. Talking about the weight classes, so when the new weight classes came out, obviously that was a big shift. Do you think that there's going to be another change in weight classes anytime soon?
I hope not. um, I, I suspect there probably won't be another shift until the next quad. And when I say the next quad, post 2021.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Which is weird because now we're in a 3 year span.
Exactly, exactly. So,
So yeah, it makes me wonder if it's just going to hold off till after that. Yeah, I'm hoping that we don't see much shifting because it does take a lot to navigate athletes that have been in the sport for, 5+ years
mhm.
when we get them really set in a class and really performing well and get all those things and factors dialed in, prepping for competition. And then all of a sudden it's like, hey, for you to be competitive, you've got to now gain 4 kilos, or for you,
Yeah,
or the other way around,
right,
you
right.
know. Um, so let's kind of walk through game day.
Sure.
So you've got, so let's just talk about like the individual. Um, so that day, wake up, that individual's competing that day. Let's start with just kind of athlete check-in. You check in with them first thing in the morning, and then once you do that, what's the rest of the day kind of look like as far as getting that athlete prepared for walking onto the platform?
Yeah. I've made it a policy with myself and my coaches to always meet the athlete for weigh-in.
Hmm.
I think there's only been maybe one occasion where I wasn't there, and in most situations that athlete is probably going to be okay.
Yeah,
However, there's heightened nerves. There's a lot of other athletes that are in line. People are sizing each other up. Like, oh, you never know. All your competitors are there. It's the first time you're coming
yeah,
face to face, and nobody wants to go with that alone.
yeah.
So,
That reminds me of a quick story. The first time I took an athlete, it was her first time to go to universities,
mhm.
and and we are in Ogden, Utah, and I don't know if you've been to that, but it's a university on the side of like a mountain. So just hills and all of this all over the place. And it's just a big winding maze. So I go and we pull up, we walk over there, we start getting ready for weigh-ins. And I've got the checklist and I'm like, okay, you got this and that. She's like, yes, yes, yes. And she double checks. She's like, oh, wait, I don't have my ID.
Mm,
And they're about to call her, and it's close to it. And I have to jog, I have to run about a mile back to the car, like up and down these hills to get her ID, run back through all this maze, get back to there just to give her her ID just in time for her to be able to, because she was like the last one called,
right.
just in time for her to be able to weigh in time to be able to compete. But there's no way that if I wouldn't have been there, she would have been able to do all that and then still be able to perform the way she needed to perform. And so I really do think, yeah, when you can be there for weigh-in as a coach, even if, like you said, most 90% of the time everything's going to be fine. But when there's that
Right.
one little thing, if you're there, it makes a big difference. But go on. So your
And
coaches are there for weigh-ins.
right. And and just to I have a similar story, but I would say that the athletes that I generally are the most concerned with at weigh-in, not so much because they're not going to make weight, but because they didn't bring their singlet if they're a junior or a youth, or are the younger ones, right? It's
Yeah,
it's it's it's
yeah,
those are the ones that I think AO2 last year, one of them forgot their socks, and they wouldn't let them weigh in, and so we had to,
yeah.
like, run around trying to borrow
Yeah,
socks from somebody.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. The last thing you want is your athletes not knowing what to do and being lost in that circumstance.
Right.
But like you said, obviously you can't. I mean, there's been times, yeah, I've been the only coach at some of these meets, and I've got athletes competing the same time a weigh-ins going on. So you try to be there as much as you can, and usually it's luckily most of the time it does go well. But yeah, if you're available there, if you're as available as possible to your
Hmm.
athletes during a competition, it does make a big difference because those little things do come up, and you want to be the one to take on that stress instead of the athlete.
Exactly. And so right after an athlete weighs in, if they make weight or don't make weight, it should be up to that coach to make that decision as to what the plan is going to be.
Hmm.
It is are they so far off, and is this a competition that doesn't really, more or less matter?
Yeah,
So let's just compete and have fun, and maybe this is a first or second competition anyways, and let's just move forward and enjoy the day and learn something from it.
yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
Now, if it's a state or higher, or something that's a qualifier, we may have a contingency plan in place where, okay, well, the athlete didn't make weight. Do we have to cut hair? Do we have to,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
do we have to find a sauna, a bike, laxatives, whatever.
yeah.
Um, so those are the sort of things that we're thinking about right after the athlete weighs in. Then we're telling them, in most cases we're typically telling them to eat, which most
Mhm.
of them forget to do because they've been cutting for a couple days, and they've reduced the calorie intakes, and they're hungry, and
Yeah, and that's something I've definitely noticed that I have to almost force on them, because
mhm.
a lot of them don't feel hungry. Their nerves are like, I feel good, I feel ready to go, and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, you wait until you get done with snatches and you're getting ready for clean and jerk. Your energy is gonna be gone. Yeah, so get the food in, and then we usually have a pretty strict like rehydration right afterwards too.
Right.
The Pedialyte, and then depending on how much they had to cut in water, they start hydrating. But that's something else that I find is hard for them to do, is to drink a lot right afterwards.
Hmm.
But I try to remind them, I was like, if you're trying to do all this during warm up, you're going to be going pee like crazy.
Exactly,
Drink a
exactly.
lot right now. Go to the bathroom as often as you need to, so that way we can limit that during warm up.
For most athletes, I'm recommending two Pedialytes, two
Yeah,
larger bottles. I don't know, is that a quart maybe?
yeah, something like that.
And that tends to work out. You've got
Hmm.
one for before your snatch session, and then you've got one for, right after that. You can take a break, chug down some more, and then get ready for clean and jerk, and hopefully go
Yeah,
to the bathroom between there. Um, but yeah, I mean, that's typically, right after weigh-in, we tell them to, let's make sure you take a nap or relax, get the food in, and just sort of, chill out.
yeah,
Don't focus on anything else.
yeah, yeah.
You know,
Yeah, that's definitely a big one because I mean, I'm sure you've seen it multiple times too, and it gets better and better as an athlete gets more is in the sport and competes more often. But their energy is going, like they're just ready to
mhm.
go, and they're to try to get them to relax, but They've got their cortisol levels are up, their intensity is high, and they don't realize it, but they're amped for too long.
Right.
You just weighed in and you're just anticipating, all right, I'm ready to get on the barbell. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go, ready to go. And when you do that for 2 hours straight, you're
You're
exhausted by
exhausted.
the time you
Yeah.
start really getting to the barbell. And so, yeah, to try to get them to calm down, if we're at a hotel, I'm like, go back to your room, watch some TV, lay down, chill
Hmm.
out. And yeah, I do notice that that's a big one, though, to try to get people to get their food in, get hydrated, and then try to relax as much as possible. Stay away from the other athletes. Stay away from lifts right now.
Hmm.
Just chill until I come and get you.
I mean, my advice is always like, let's stay out of the warm-up room for as long as possible
Hmm.
until we have to start getting ready or, go out for
Yeah,
announcements or whatever. The warm-up room in itself is chaotic. You could be sharing a platform with your
yeah,
competitor. Like you never know. So,
yeah.
uh,
Energy's high in the warm up area, man. That's what I've always talked about. I was like, I think this would be a more spectator, like a higher spectator sport, if there was more visualization of what's going on in the back.
that's a good idea. Maybe they need more
you know?
back room cams or something for the
Yeah,
audience.
yeah. Watching
Yeah.
those back and forth warm up lifts. Yeah, competitors sharing platforms, coaches making changes, burning attempts. I mean,
Mhm.
that stuff is that stuff is intense, And then I go and I sit in the audience and I'm like, I can calm down a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Especially when you go back to back over, 3, 4 sessions throughout the whole day. It's, as a
Oh yeah.
coach, you're here. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's draining, man. All right, so athletes chilling out, staying away from the warm up area as long
mhm.
as possible. Um, Now it's time for them to head into the warm up area. You meet them, get them in there. You go assign a platform. Kind of what's your approach from there on out?
So as I mentioned before, we have a prescriptive warm up routine that we go through,
Hmm.
and I feel like this isn't the secret sauce, but it's key. You should have at least a framework in place.
Yeah,
Understanding, how long that athlete needs to warm up for. To get ready for a maximum attempt, and these things should be evaluated throughout, that athlete's training cycle. So there's some sessions we'll go through the same routine. I'll
yeah,
write something out, and then we'll see if the athlete can adhere to it. Are they gassed? Can they perform? Are they able to kind of push beyond and overcome and hit that 102, 103%?
yeah.
So the warm up plan, I think, is critical. I've noticed a lot of coaches, and not a lot of coaches do it, and I think the extra time definitely pays off, especially when you're
Yeah,
managing anything more than 5 athletes within a weekend. It
yeah.
becomes difficult, so things start to get blurry after a while. Usually it's myself and another coach that's back there. Either I'm changing plates or the other coaches. So he's kind of approached as a team unless, we're restricted to do so. I'm generally giving my athletes a pep talk, but not until they actually get to, the cue or they're in the hole, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah, I think
Um,
that's good to try to make those warm-ups feel as much like just a normal day of training as
mhm.
possible. So I do think that changing that dynamic for them, being there on them, pep talking them through the whole like warm-up phase. I think it's like it's bringing it to the surface too early.
Right, right.
Save that for that last lift, before you go and hit your opener, or even save it for the opener.
And even with the warm up plan, those openers are still they're TBD. We don't know what those are going to be
Hmm.
until that athlete, unless that athlete is so consistent, we don't have to worry about it. But everybody changes on the day of competition. Some people look really
Yeah.
good. Some people, if you're new to the sport, you're catching everything in a power position versus
Yeah.
getting underneath the bar. So we kind of hold that evaluation throughout. The warm up. Like, can this athlete make 91? Probably not. Maybe let's go 87.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
So that brings up another question. Do y'all typically put in a very conservative opener and then go up from there?
in most cases, unless it's a highly competitive situation where we know where it's going to
Yeah.
come down to the last 2 lifts.
Yeah.
So in most cases, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Unless you, yeah, yeah, because the other issue with that is sometimes you're burning one of your changes.
Yeah, it's
You
true.
know?
It's true. It's true. I tend to be, like I said, very conservative. I'm very risk adverse. I want my athletes to always make their opener. When you don't make your opener, the amount of stress that comes up, and it's difficult for
Yeah.
a coach to kind of like back that down. Like, oh, okay, you didn't make your opener. You got two more attempts. Oh, you didn't make your second attempt.
Yeah, yeah, it's crunch time.
Right,
Agreed.
exactly. No matter how much, sideline coaching you give them, you can't lift the bar for them. So,
Yeah.
you're really just trying to make sure that the athlete's successful at the end of the day. I think that, and that's the most important thing.
Hmm.
Having the athlete, walk away from a competition because they bombed out or because, they weren't prepared. I mean, they're always going to blame the coach.
Yeah.
It's always the athlete's successes and the coach's failure. So,
Yeah.
we want to win together. We don't want to push our athletes beyond what we think they can do. And I'm sure,
Absolutely.
you've had athletes who are like, I'm going for that 108%,
Oh yeah.
whatever today. And it's like, I don't think so.
Yeah, yeah. This the one that I really like though is when they're like, coach, man, just put it on the bar. Just put it on the bar. And I'm like, no, I'm gonna. So they're like, put 110 on the bar. Put 110 on the bar. And I'm like, man, I'm gonna go put in 107. And then I put in 107, and then they go and they hit it, and they're like, see, I could have done 110. I'm like, you don't know that. You don't know that. That 107 was a successful lift, and that doesn't mean that 110 would have been the successful lift.
Exactly.
So yeah, but I do like, but what I do like about the overly confident lifters is if you do pull them back a little bit like that, they're usually going to attack it like it's that heavier weight.
It's true. It's
Yeah,
true. One of the things I like to do as well is, even if we have an athlete that's, they've got the capability, it really depends on what the goal is, right? So if the goal
yeah,
is to qualify, we'll work towards that. If the goal is to win, we work towards that. But I'm never going to push an athlete or try to, change, put their final result at risk because they wanted to hit a heavier weight or we're going for
yeah,
something
yeah,
that they've
yeah,
never. You mentioned the Hail Mary lift before, so that's a term we use as well. We're never doing we never want to do that.
yeah, yeah. Agreed. Especially in a circumstance where it doesn't matter, like the just for the sake of hitting a PR, but then placing 35th in the competition, like
Right,
you're going to be much more confident going 6 for 6 leading into your next competition than you are, just clarking a final lift.
right,
And
right.
so, and but I sometimes do believe, but I agree with you too. It all comes down to what the goal is. If we're going into a meet and we're like, this is the last week and you can qualify for nationals, and you have to hit 100% to qualify for nationals, well, we're probably going to be a lot more aggressive. We're going to be risky, but we're
Mhm.
going into it knowing that we only need to make 2 lifts. We're not
Right.
going into it with the goal of trying to do our best performance. Our goal is that we have to hit this number and we have to hit this number, so therefore we have to put it on the bar.
That's true. Yeah.
So there are those circumstances, and I think it does come down to whatever the goal of that specific competition is. But um, but again, I think that's talking about like the minority when it comes to like a club gym. Most of our athletes aren't qualifying for nationals. Most of our athletes aren't on the podium at a national meet.
Hmm.
Most of our athletes are people that enjoy weightlifting. They do it to get as good as they can, to perform as well as they can, and they want to see progress. And I like like you keep saying, like I'm fairly conservative. And I like that though, because what that does too, though, is it shows that an athlete, and it shows to that athlete, we can make this progressive increase in our competition total, in our lifts, in how we perform. And last time we went 4 for 6, now we're going 5 for 6, now we're going six
Hmm.
for six. And I think showing these different areas of progress is very, very important in a sport where it's really easy to hit a wall.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that, we tend to do, is we run mock meets, which I think most gyms are doing to some degree, either internal or they're going to, smaller meets with other clubs so they can prove out,
Yeah.
strategies and whatnot. But, a competition, you should either A, podium, or B, qualify, and C, you have to learn. So there has
Yeah.
to be something that comes out of that performance. Okay, so you have trouble locking out, or you have, trouble getting under the bar, or we have
Mhm.
the warm up wasn't quite right. So, those are things that's the data that comes out of it so that you can apply it for the next time.
Yeah, that's good. So that being said, like with most of our meets, especially like our bigger meets and our really planned meets, we'll do a post competition like meeting and follow up.
Mhm.
And we use that time to go over, hey, all right, how did warm-ups go? How did you feel about that? And then that's when we're like, really, it was probably a few too many attempts, or, I prefer to like speed up our warm-ups or slow them down a little
Right.
bit, or I need some more breaks for bathroom. So do y'all, and for the exact same reason, that way we're always fine-tuning at every single meet we go to. Do
Mhm.
y'all do any kind of post-competition evaluation, at least amongst your coaches and stuff like that?
We do amongst the coaches,
Yeah,
not so much with the athletes, unless, there's a concern where, they feel something should have gone a different way and, that happens.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But generally it's just among the coaches so that we can, take whatever we learned from that meet and, we basically have a goal board, and on that board, we try to figure out ways to get to the individual, attributes or milestones.
Cool, cool, cool.
So, I mean,
Yeah, go ahead.
so I was going to say, you mentioned meet day. So, one of the other things that, so now the athlete is warmed up. They're in the hole. We've given them pep talk.
Hmm.
Generally, I'm not giving them too much advice. And I see
Yeah,
coaches do this all the time. And it's like, they're on the sideline and they're like, fast on the floor, tight in the back, look forward. And it's like, 50 things going on. And
yeah,
like the athlete's just trying to process all this and it's impossible. I mean, how long does it take to snatch a bar? It's less than a second. Like,
yeah,
you
yeah.
can't really think that fast.
You're not, yeah,
Um,
that's gonna slow you down if anything.
right, right. So
Yeah.
I tend to only stick to one or two cues
Hmm.
at most as an athlete is walking onto the platform. And typically it's like, relax, find your
Yeah,
focus and lock in and just do your job.
yeah,
And,
yeah,
and
absolutely. I think that is, you know, um, I think that is one of the underappreciated things because from an athlete to a coach, or maybe from athletes looking on, it looks like that coach isn't doing much,
right,
you know? But the over coaching and over cueing is one of the, I think, one of the bigger flaws in coaching, period. Because you're you're overloading an athlete and giving them so much information that they're ending up not doing anything. And so I think I think the really good coaches are the ones that can figure out the least amount of words you can use to create the biggest result, the biggest amount of changes in an
right,
athlete. And that even just goes from like to day-to-day coaching, pick the thing that's going to fix the most amount of things, or that's the biggest problem, and let's address that first, and then let the athlete work on that. And don't continue to change what you're telling them. Don't change things up over and over and over. And I think but I think from an athlete that can sometimes be frustrating
right.
because they want more and more and more.
Everybody thinks there's a secret and there's not.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's really just work and listen to your coaches.
Agreed.
Um,
Yeah.
another tip that I tend to have my athletes not do is I'm not a big fan of folks kind of with those big headphones on and they're all hoodied
Mm,
out, and I find that when athletes take those off and then they go out onto the platform, it's the stimulus from like going from this
yeah.
this environment that's overwhelming to a platform with silence and everybody staring at you in this skin tight outfit is somewhat overwhelming.
Yeah.
So I try to have the athletes, really acclimate to the environment without music and try to keep it, pretty even keeled.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point, and I've kind of gone back and forth on that, and haven't really figured out exactly how I feel on specifically that, because for the most part, I take that same approach. I'm like, listen, you're not going to have music blasting in your ears
Mhm.
when you go take your heavy clean and jerk. You got to figure out how to, arouse yourself prior to, because it's going to be silent and it's just you and the barbell. But then I have other athletes that, you know, they have a tendency to overthink while they're just sitting there for their next attempt.
Sure.
And so, do they need some form of meditation, to zone out and relax again? Now, I don't believe that, throwing some loud dubstep in their ears is probably going to help you know, their energy drop a little bit in between lifts. But I still haven't quite figured that out. Now, again, same approach though with my new athletes. It's going to be, hey, we're practicing today like we're competing. Take
Hmm.
the headphones off every time you go up there and take a lift. You need to get ready for that. You need to know what that's like. You're not going
Right.
to have that. And so I do think that that's really important. But I do have the few athletes that I've kind of given some leeway on that. And it's because I haven't figured out a way to get them to kind of chill out. Maybe after their opener, if they're having to sit there, if we don't have time for a lift in the back, but they're having to sit there for almost 5 minutes before their next clean and
Hmm.
jerk, it's like, how do we get them to kind of chill out, relax, and not just sit there and focus on their next lift and wear themselves out?
Right, right. And in most cases, it's either myself or one of my coaches that are sitting there just trying to talk to the athlete, and
Mm,
generally that'll sort of, bring him back down to earth. Because I
yeah,
understand. I mean, they're up here, their heart's beating, they're amped, the amount of adrenaline is overwhelming. But I think a quick conversation about how well they're doing or what they can fix at a
yeah, yeah,
small
yeah.
level will go a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. Almost giving them something to focus on
Mhm.
while they're sitting there is I think, yeah, I think it's a really good approach. Hey, yeah, that first lift looked really, really strong. Remember this cue. Now just hang out. You're up in two lifts. That kind of thing just kind of changes their mind a little bit, as opposed to maybe overthinking something, especially if they just missed a lift.
Right,
Um,
right.
you know, I do like what you said, have another coach there, because sometimes if you're over at the table having to watch, you're not always going to be able to sit there right there with your athlete. So having another coach in the room, or a lot of times our athletes will pick who they want in the back. They're like, hey, I
Mhm.
want this teammate back there with me because they keep my energy where I want it. They're a calming effect. They know what to say if I'm struggling. So a lot of our athletes also have those, can lean on some of their teammates to be that in between. So yeah, I totally agree. I'm not a huge fan of the headphones, but I haven't quite figured out what that perfect balance is sometimes for specific athletes.
Yeah, everybody's different.
Yeah.
I would always say, and I would always challenge my athletes, like, prove me wrong. Like,
Yeah,
tell me,
yeah, yeah. And that's
like,
and I think that's a great approach. You know, this is what I know. This is what I've seen. Because that's usually what we're basing our information off of, is the majority. But
right.
there are those small cases. There are things that are different for individuals, and I think that's like what you just said, is that, yeah, the prove me wrong is a great approach to kind of being able to negotiate and work a little bit with your athlete. But when they don't prove you wrong, you're like, all right, time to listen to coach.
Exactly. I'm not always right, but I'm right most of the time.
Exactly. Totally agree. Um, I also really liked what you said about, you know, not the game day is not the day to be coaching. Like, you're not changing technique on the day that they're
No,
they're
no.
performing lifts, and I agree. Uh, just the motivation is, I think, the more important role of the coach at that time, or just that one simple cue. Sure, if they tend to have like soft elbows, you might just remind them, to reach really hard or to punch really hard.
Right.
But you just give them that one simple cue, or it's like, hey, set tight, pull hard. It's just enough information to where they're not overthinking,
Hmm.
but they can go out there and just be, do what they need to do,
I mean,
and so I really like that. And I think that that's a huge part of competition day.
most athletes are kind of in that flight for life scenario where it's like,
Yeah.
they can't think about, 50 things coming in.
Hmm.
The only time I really talk to my athletes when they're on the platform is in the clean and jerk session. For snatch, it's like, I give them a pep talk, they walk on, they do their job most of the time, and then they come off and we tell them what they, how good they're doing. We're on task. The plan
Yeah.
is going according to the way we envisioned it, whatever. Clean and jerk, we can get a little bit more creative and we can give them cues, like you said, punch through, step out,
Yeah.
little things.
Yeah.
But, overall, once the athlete has weighed in and they've warmed up, that train has left the station. It's like,
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And, it always, it's hard not to feel for an athlete that's over there struggling and seeing another coach just literally taking them through like a one-on-one training session.
mhm,
I'm like, that's not, they don't need that right now. They just need a pep talk and then just like a quick reminder. So that way, and I find that those reminders are almost what put them in that meditative state,
right.
So when they go out there and they're just like, all right, just get tight, or, all right, just be aggressive. All they're focusing on is that, which really what that does is it allows their body to perform what it needs to perform, and they're not focused on a bunch of different things.
Right. Right. So, one other thing that we tend to do for some athletes, not every athlete is really into this, is, doing some sort of either myofascial massage or
Mm,
slapping in the
yeah.
back, pop their ears. Everybody's a little bit different. Most of the guys tend to respond better than the women. They don't want to be, I guess, slapped around.
Yeah, yeah,
But it's for some people, that seems to be a big enough distraction for them
yeah,
when they go on the
absolutely.
platform where it's, they just perform.
Yeah.
um, you know my coach would always pop my ears, and I hated it, but
Hmm.
I understand why it's there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. In the pre-competition form that we fill out, that's also one of the questions that get, do you prefer traps, back, legs,
Mm,
slaps or not?
right.
The ears are a good one. Um, the So I've heard this stuff about ears before, and I don't know if you know a little bit more about it, but from what I've heard is it has to do with eliciting, your different, nervous systems, the parasympathetic or the sympathetic, where one can kind of cause a calming effect, where the other can cause more of kind of that fight or flight
Yeah.
effect. And you can almost utilize it depending on what that athlete needs. Does that athlete need to be hyped up, or does that athlete need to be calmed down?
Right. That's true. That's true. I never thought about it that way. In most cases, we're trying to, like, walk that, try to back that athlete off the ledge.
Yeah,
So as they're getting ready to go out for their next attempt, we're typically giving them, a little bit of massage. If they just went for, a heavy clean, we might be, working on their back, or if they're having problems locking out, we'll be reminding them, where
yeah,
their triceps are,
yeah,
so that they can lock out. Um, yeah, I mean, I think there's, different approaches, and, I definitely need to, take a look at, why some of those work better than others.
yeah.
The one thing that always, was interesting to me is when my coach would pop my ears, he just wouldn't pull the lobes or smash the
Mhm.
tops. He'd literally pop the ears, and
Really?
you hear nothing. It's almost like it's if a bomb went off.
Yeah.
And I always felt like that silence that's created by doing so is one of those things that's intentional. Like,
Hmm.
you're going out there, it's almost like if you take a sniff of ammonia.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it numbs you out a little bit
Right,
before you go
exactly.
out there, and and it can be a really good reset. But I like what you also said, because I do notice that some approaches from coaches can be that, like, um, you know every athlete needs to be hyped up. I'm going to slap all my athletes or not, or they're not lifting, and I do like what you're saying, where it's so individual based that you need to really learn from your athletes and really talk to them and communicate with them and then practice those things in training before going to competition. Because a lot of athletes don't know if they want to be slapped on their shoulders or ears to be popped beforehand.
Right.
And so sometimes if you have that conversation with your athlete, you're like, okay, hey, you know what? We've got a heavy clean and jerk this Saturday. Let's give it a shot. Let's see how you respond to it. And if they're like, no, I hated that. It distracted me. I couldn't think about anything else. I wasn't focused. They're like, okay, that is not what we're going to do in competition then. You know?
Yeah, every athlete is it's almost like, decoding, it's a secret step in order to get to that final destination. Every athlete is somewhat different in the
Yeah.
terms of, what's going to really, turn them on in certain areas and turn them off in others. So, that's the empirical data that you get from, just coaching with them on an ongoing basis and being in
Mm-hmm.
the same training hall with them for, months, years, what have you.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
find we find that some athletes, they prefer, you know, so what we find that some athletes with, like, not even, we don't even get all the information from the coaches. It's like, it might be where the athlete's training partner is the one like telling us, oh, he told me that this
Mm-hmm.
doesn't work, and whatever. I noticed you did this last time and he really pushed through. So
Yeah. Yeah. That's also really a huge avenue for feedback is a lot of the training partners, because a lot of times they're communicating with their training partner maybe more than their coach. And so to have a good team dynamic is, I think really, really important in weightlifting. And, always, you know, some people do really, really well just on their own, zoned out.
mhm.
Others like the energy of their team. And then as a coach, that's really good to be able to approach, hey, so and so had a really good training session last week. Y'all two were lifting together. Did you notice anything different? What were you guys doing that, out of the ordinary? Why was it so well? And sometimes you can get some really good information. He was like, man, I slapped his shoulders every time he walked out there and he just killed it. Like, okay, that's some really good information to get.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think that team dynamic is still really important, even though this is a pretty individual sport.
It is. You need that team to really, help you along and get you ready for a competition. I mean, at the end of the day, it's you and a coach in a barbell, but it's really the team that sort of, they provide the structure. Um,
Yeah,
I feel like that's probably one of the biggest, I hate to sell it, selling points about, the way that we train is that we do it in this team environment. So,
agreed. That's definitely been a recent struggle for our athletes that typically are around people training, and then we've had to go through this COVID-19 quarantining, and they're really getting to the point now where they're struggling to really stay motivated because
yeah,
they're beating
it's tough.
themselves up through training, but then they don't have that to be able to bounce that off of the other athletes, or they're going through the same stuff that they're going through. It's a tough time, and I think we're all pretty ready to get back into the gym.
Yeah, we are definitely.
Yeah. Looks like we're running down to about our last minute. Anything else you wanted to add real quick?
I think that's pretty much we covered. And I know it's somewhat sporadic. We were kind of all over the place, but
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think we I think we covered quite a bit. The only thing we didn't cover, which is probably just the gameplay of what the coach would be doing throughout the session. So obviously
Mm,
they're getting the athlete perform ready to perform. They're getting them warmed up. Now what are the coaches doing off to the side?
yeah,
It,
I think that's, it's going to kick us off here in about 1 minute. But I think talking about the whole coaches side and what the coaches are doing and game planning, I think that would be a really good conversation to follow up with. We should definitely get on here and talk about the different tactics, what we're doing in the back, why we're making changes, when we're making changes to attempts, and that whole thing too. I think that would be a really good conversation to have.
yeah, for sure, for sure. I really enjoyed this. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, man, thanks for jumping on. We'll definitely I'll hit you up shortly after this, and we'll see if we can plan out another one
Okay.
and we'll pick a couple more topics. But I think that would be a really interesting one to do.
Awesome. Thank
Cool,
you so
man.
much.
All
Yeah.
right. Talk to you
So much
soon.
fun. Thank you.
All
Bye bye.
right, bye.